I'd now like to introduce our keynote speaker, Todd Teske. Todd is Chairman, President, and CEO of Briggs & Stratton Corporation. Before being appointed to this position, he served as President, CEO, President, COO, Executive Vice President, COO. Clearly, he's moved up the ranks at Briggs & Stratton. Before joining Briggs & Stratton, Todd was the second best manager at Arthur Andersen & Company. Yes, I worked there. Where he served various clients, led and performed several merger investigations, and was involved in many public equity and debt offerings. As you know, Todd is very involved in the GMC and the community as a whole. He serves on the GMC's board of directors, and with Jonas Pricing and Mike Lovell, co-chairs the GMC's Innovation in Milwaukee, or MIKE initiative. Todd is a member of the American Institute of CPAs and the Wisconsin Institute of CPAs. He serves on my board of directors, Badger Meter, and those of Junior Achievement of Wisconsin, Lennox International, the Management Association, the MMAC, and many more. He earned his accounting degree from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, where he is on the Business Advisory Board for the College of Business. And he earned his MBA from Northwestern University. Please join me in welcoming Todd Teske.
Okay, there we go. Good afternoon. So I did start at Arthur Andersen. There was a certain manager who was the mentor for all the first-year staff, and that happened to be Rich. So if I do anything that would at all resemble Rich, it goes all the way back to when he mentored me as a first-year staff person. So normally the way I start this discussion is I ask people how many engines they have in their garage. I'm going to start this one a little different. How many of you actually mow your own lawn? Actually, quite a few. How many people have at least one Briggs & Stratton engine in their garage? 2? 3? 4? Okay, 4. So the record is 7. I have 6, but I work for the company. So for those of you who only have 1 or 2, I have the order book with me. We'll be taking orders in the back afterward. What I want to share with you today is talk a little bit about the innovation road journey that we've been going on at Briggs & Stratton over the last several years. You've heard, some of you I've talked to, we've come out with more innovation in the last 2 or 3 years than we have, I think, in the whole 16 years before this when I joined the company in 1996. But to do that and to do justice to what the team has accomplished, what I want to do is take you back and just talk a little bit about the history of the company very briefly, so to set the stage for kind of the culture and what we were dealing with when we started down the innovation trail. So the company started in the beginning, 1908, Harry Stratton, Stephen Briggs. Stephen Briggs was the inventor, Harry Stratton was the investor. They set out to be a car company, and you can see down in the lower right-hand corner of the slide, you can see the car that they created. They made 3. Not 3 models, 3 cars. The Ford family did a little better than we did. But what it did was it launched the company as an automotive supplier. And to this day, a separate company that we spun off back in, I think, 92 or 93, Strattec Security, run by Frank Krejci today, is still out there as a public company and doing extremely well. That was the extent of our auto exposure with locks and keys. You can see Harry and Stephen on the Briggs & Stratton Flyer, and you can see the motor wheel down in the lower left-hand corner. We bought that from A.O. Smith in 1919. It's funny talking to Ajita from A.O. Smith. He calls it the Smith Flyer. I call it the Briggs & Stratton Flyer. But for those of you who wondered whether there was this just incestuous relationship amongst Milwaukee companies way back when, you're right, because when you look at all the things that A.O. Smith spawned off in the different businesses, we were really one of them. So it wasn't until we took the motor wheel off the motor off the wheel that we became the engine company. And people ask me all the time, so what's the biggest accomplishment in the history of the company? I would tell you it's 1954, where we made the first aluminum block engine out of Wauwatosa. And the reason that was a big deal is before that it was all cast iron engines. And so if you think about mowing your lawn with a heavy cast iron engine, they didn't have self-propelled back then. And ultimately what would happen is you would have to have a very small lawn because you just couldn't handle those mowers. But if you think about the late 40s into the mid 50s, you had the war ending, you had suburbia growing, and you ultimately had people who wanted to have more of their own land. And so, you know, if you think about it, it's funny to think, I live out in the Lake Country right now. I live out in the town of Delafield. And to think that Wauwatosa was the sprawling suburbs of Milwaukee back in the 50s and 60s is a little hard to believe, but it's true. And when you look at the aluminum block engine, it allowed for people to mow their lawns, have bigger yards, mow their lawns. And so from the 50s, the 60s, into the 70s, and I'm going to say this with all due respect and affection for my predecessors, but we didn't have salespeople. We had order takers and allocators. We couldn't make enough of this stuff. And what we did was we started building onto that Wauwatosa facility, the one that peaked out at over 2 million square feet under roof. And we would make 10 million engines out of the one facility, and we had 10,000 people that we employed at the company. Life was pretty good back then. We would put OEMs into business. In fact, any of you familiar with the Murray Bicycle Company? Anybody have a Murray bike when they were a kid? Well, the CEO of Murray was a college roommate, college classmate, I guess, in Harvard Business School of Vince Shealy, who was the CEO at the time of Briggs. And Vince convinced his classmate that making lawnmowers and making bicycles really isn't that much different. So ultimately, Murray, Inc. was created back in the late 60s, early 70s. That's the kind of demand that was out there for this type of equipment. Then it started to change a little bit. We got into the 80s. Retail started to shift. And if you think about in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, I remember going to the dealership with my dad to buy a new Jacobson lawnmower. And I'll never forget the day he bought the Lawn Boy lawnmower, and he was very, very proud of it. Probably because I was going to mow the lawn, but he was very proud of it. Well, it started to shift. And all of a sudden, you started to see retailers pop up. And you started to see Heckingers in Builders Square. This little upstart out of Atlanta called the Home Depot. Little upstart out of Charlotte, North Carolina called Lowe's. Sears had been there for a long time. True Value, Walmart. Anybody remember Montgomery Ward? So retail started to consolidate. Still didn't change the power base in the industry, but it was starting to consolidate. These retailers were starting to take business away from dealers. So ultimately what would happen is there was a little sharper pencil every time that the OEMs, again, I'm going to refer to original equipment manufacturers, people we sell engines to, they'd have to go and sharpen the pencil a little bit more. It was still okay though. But you still had some brands that that stayed off in the dealer business. Toro, John Deere stayed in the dealer business. Then as we got into the 80s, into the 90s, we were threatened. Briggs & Stratton was threatened. And I keep a copy of Milwaukee Magazine that had Fred Stratton on the cover. I keep that in my office, and I refer back to it every so often. Will Briggs & Stratton survive? What it was the Japanese coming in. And if you think back to the 70s, product coming out of Japan was junk, right? It wasn't very good. And then all of a sudden it got better, and it got better. And companies like Honda and Kawasaki started to penetrate the market. And when the yen was at 220 to the dollar, it was pretty inexpensive to buy yen to pay the Japanese manufacturers. We were threatened. So we started down a path of cost reducing in a big way. Everything became about cost. We started moving plants down south. First plant was 1985 in Murray, Kentucky. We still have that plant today. Second plant was 1989 in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. Have that plant to this day. The cultures of those plants were very cost focused. Then we get into the 90s. Now, as we got into the 90s, what happened was the Japanese yen got cut in half, right? It was now 110. Completely different ballgame. The Japanese never had the cost base in which to compete with Briggs & Stratton. They could do it off of currencies, but they couldn't do it off of raw cost. So then we got into the 90s, into the 2000s, and all of a sudden, that little retailer out of Atlanta and that little retailer out of Charlotte got very big. And the rest kind of went away. True Value and Ace still are out there, but 80% of U.S. lawn and garden is sold through those 4 major mass retailers. Sears always has had the #1 position. They acquiesced that 2 years ago to Lowe's. And I think some of you follow the trials and travails of Sears. When this started happening, it created a whole different dynamic in the industry. Because when you have this much concentration in the hands of 4 major mass retailers, and the orders became big and lumpy, the OEMs really cut back, and they started slashing prices. We weren't just impacted as much. But MTD, Modern Tool and Die out of Cleveland, maybe you've never heard of them. Cub Cadet, Yardman, Yard Machines, that's their primary brands. Husqvarna brand now, Weed Eater, Poulon Pro, McCulloch. These brands were not very well-known brands. Briggs was the brand. In fact, if I go on the street back then and even today and I ask, who are the major manufacturers of lawn and garden equipment, I will hear John Deere, Toro, and Briggs & Stratton. We've never branded a lawnmower Briggs & Stratton. Our brand is on it, but not solely Briggs & Stratton. John Deere and Toro, they have about that much share. It's MTD and Husqvarna that have the share because all those retailers I showed you back from the 80s and the 90s, that's who MTD and Husqvarna were selling to. So now all of a sudden you start to sharpen your pencil, you start to take prices down. What do you do to try and maintain profitability? You cut product development and you cut advertising. You didn't have much brand equity out there to begin with, so whatever brand equity you did have, it's just got cut. And you don't do as much R&D and product development. So this category started down the path of commoditization. And at the same time, as we got into the 2000s, the other Asian player started to make more headway, and that's the Chinese. And so this is where I'll pick up the innovation story. So the Chinese started coming in and basically would undercut us by 10 to 15% consistently across the board. They don't have brands, but in a commoditized state that this industry was heading down and in, basically the OEMs would look at the Chinese and go, well, I can take even cost down even further. What they failed to understand was you can't take cost down to 0. So we started having pricing pressure come on our products, especially the small vertical shaft. I'm going to talk about 2 types of engines, right? Vertical shaft, crankshaft's down, you put a blade on, you get a lawnmower. Horizontal shaft, you put an alternator on, you get a generator, you put a pump on, you get a pressure washer. We have the lowest cost base in the world when it relates to vertical shaft engines. And we were being underpriced by 10 to 15%, which means the economics were false, were fake. So we had to do something. Well, we kind of go down the path of thinking about innovation, and we were headed down a forward integration strategy, which is really, I'm not going to read this to you, but this shows kind of the acquisitions. 2 things to point out on here. A lot of brands, and that's an issue that we're dealing with going forward. The other thing is look at the break between 2008 and 2012, and I'll explain that here in a minute. So we started down the path of acquiring Generac Simplicity. I mentioned Murray before. It went bankrupt. It got bought by a Chinese company. It went bankrupt. They owed us $40 million, so we bought the assets. And then we bought this company called Victa. Victa's a really cool company. So you heard about, if you make a photocopy, it's a Xerox. If you go grab a facial tissue, it's a Kleenex. In Australia, you don't cut your lawn, you Victa your lawn. It's a cool company, really cool company. Bought that in 2008. But we were still pounding down this forward integration strategy, and what we realized was we needed to have innovation, but we weren't quite sure how to do it. Until one day, when it was time for my wife and I to go and buy a new washer and dryer. So she says I'm frugal. I think I call myself cheap, but she says I'm frugal. So I'm checking the Sunday ads back when they had Sunday ads in the paper, and I'm thinking $300 for the washer, $300 for the dryer. I'm out of here. It was $600. You know, maybe a little delivery installation cost, all is good. I was wrong. We walked out of the store. We spent $1,300 on the washer, $1,300 on the dryer. We got the matching pedestals, and we had to pay delivery and installation costs. It was well over $2,600 So I went in $600 and it's $2,600. So I went back to the team, I told the story, that was on Saturday, I told the story to the team on Monday and I said, help me understand why I just spent $2,600. It was Whirlpool. So we had some contacts over at Whirlpool. We got on a plane, went over to Michigan, over the lake, just on the other side, and we sat down with their people. And we said, how did you do this? Because the parallels between white goods and outdoor power equipment are fairly similar. When you think about a washer and dryer that's $300, it's kind of down and dirty and going down the commoditized path. But it was when they finally came out with these front load washers, and I said front load dryers, but that's where all of a sudden you get it in different colors. How'd you do this? So we went and we talked to the R&D people at Whirlpool, and they showed us how they set up usability labs. They showed us that it was about understanding the customer so well. I think we've all heard about voice of customer. It's about understanding that customer so well, giving them what they need. And they showed us the two-way mirrors where they had the people come in and use the product. They watched how they used it. They made it really simple, easy to use. Then they showed some testimonials. And they showed these women. There were no guys. I don't know why, but there's just women. And these women were getting extremely emotional over their washer and dryer. And it dawned on me, that's the bar. The bar is when we can get some big burly guy on video getting very emotional about his lawn tractor, we've hit it. So we came back and we started the same thing. We started down the path of usability labs. And we set it up in Wauwatosa. We'd bring people and we'd go out to people's homes. And then what we started doing is we'd put a lawnmower out, we'd get permission, put a lawnmower out in a parking lot, and what would happen is we would ultimately have people try to start the lawnmower. So I'm going to show you a video of this woman who was looking to start, and this video was pretty profound for us.
So at this point, we'd be ready to do that first mowing of the season? Mm-hmm. All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get it started up?
Okay. Okay. Please start. Oh, wait. Does this need a... No, it doesn't look like it has a primer plug.
That's what you're looking for right now, the primer plug?
The primer plug, yeah. I didn't have one on the one I had back in 1974, but my new one, I do have one. I don't see one, so I guess you don't need to do that.
I had the exact same reaction you just had. I was laughing. I thought it was really funny. So a few months later, we brought our engineers together. It was maybe, 100, 125 engineers into our auditorium. And I got up, I showed that video. Video ends, same reaction to what you just had. But I got up, and I looked at them and I said, what do you think's so funny? When was the last time you got in your car and started your car and had the same reaction that woman had? Like a pin drop. You could hear a pin drop in that room. The team understood. The team understood that this is not acceptable. So we started down the path of innovation. And we couldn't talk about innovation. The word innovation is just everywhere, right? Everybody uses it, and no one knows what the word means. And we started defining the words that we use, and we started to be very clear on what we said. So we're not going to talk innovation. We're going to talk user-driven problem solving. Okay? Because we can try to figure out how to laser cut grass. We can try to genetically engineer grass where it doesn't need to be cut, which would be really bad for us, but if somebody's going to do it to you, you might as well be the one. No, this was going to be user-driven problem solving. That woman didn't really understand how to start that mower. And by the way, did you see that big yank that she gave to that cord? And then she was really happy when it started? That's a problem. So we started down the path and came up with some pretty cool things. Here's our strategy. I'm going to skip over that. But this is how we talked about it on our company values. And you notice right up on top, we are user-driven problem solvers. And so we use the word innovation. We use value, performance, integrity. We use a lot of those words. But the key thing to focus on is user-driven problem solving. So we went down the path and we came up with some, I think, pretty cool things that weren't high tech. Look at the one in the middle, compact storage. One of the things that we came to realize when we went to people's homes, and my own experience, I have a 3.5-car garage. I could have a 10-car garage and not have enough space in my garage. Well, when you look around and see what takes up the room, it's that goofy lawnmower that's, yo big, and you can't put anything under it or over it or whatever. So what did we do? We came up with an engine that ultimately you flip it on its side, it doesn't leak. So we put this on a Toro mower. And really simple handle design, flip it over, lock it in place, stand it up, 70% less space for more Briggs & Stratton equipment for the garage, right? More space. Quiet mowing down in the lower right-hand corner. It was funny because we always had this research, and we went out and we didn't do the kind of research where we observed people. We'd go out and ask people questions. What's important to you? Well, it was always starting a noise, okay? And I used to joke with our team, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed is king. If we have the most research because we asked somebody a question, well, then I guess we're better than others. But is that really the bar we want to strive for? So by going out and doing this, we knew, and we started doing tonal quality. So that quiet mowing, we call it quiet power technology. It's on a Craftsman unit at Sears. We advertise it at 60% quieter than a regular lawnmower, which that's because the attorneys got involved. It's really 85% quieter than a regular lawnmower. I could have that mower sitting right here having this same discussion. It wouldn't distract you at all. It was funny. We took it and we showed it we were in Orlando at the Marriott. They had a Sears hometown store manager meeting. And we were demonstrating the equipment and we were demonstrating this. And it got to be pretty close to dinner time. And the wait staff came up to our people. And they said, you're going to have to stop making so much noise. And they said, well, wait a minute. You can still run that quiet one, but on that noisy one, shut that one off, will you? It was that noticeable. Other things that we're doing, ready start for ride. This is a big deal. All you have to do is push a button. You get on a tractor, you push a button. You don't have to choke it. You don't have to do anything like that. The one on the bottom is simple. It's called the transport guard. It's engine protection. What happens is, what we found is when we went out and talked to commercial users, folks that have equipment on trailers, what would happen is they would get oil and gas because you had so much bouncing because of the transportation. You'd have oil getting in and gas getting in everywhere. We put a simple valve on an engine. Got a patent on it. And now they don't have those problems at all anymore. They shut the valve off, they get to the site, turn the valve back on, the engine starts. Otherwise, you got a mess. Simple things. On the end product side, cleaning, PowerFlow Plus. What happens with pressure washers, this is going to sound like a commercial, I don't mean it to be. Pressure washers, everybody thinks pressure, 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 right? I want 3,200 PSI. Well, what really cleans is flow. So what we did was we understood that. So what we did was we made a pressure washer that had low flow, high pressure, and high pressure, low flow. Did I say that right? Vice versa, whatever it is, right? So we can get a lot of flow going through at lower pressure, does a lot for cleaning, 2-in-1. PowerSmart, that's just a small inverter. Great for Saturday afternoon margaritas. We have a special plug in the margarita. It works really well if you're out in the middle of nowhere. Grip and go, okay? This gets back to the starting thing. So you pick up the pressure washer gun, squeeze the trigger, engine starts, you start pressure washing. Symphony Power Management, that's on a home standby generator. These are these things that sit next to the house. Turn off on and off automatically. Power goes out, you've got instant power, within 30 seconds. What the power management system did is if you manage the circuits in your house, you can power your whole house with a smaller generator, reducing cost. It's because we manage the load. Suspension, mesh seat. The mesh seat one is kind of fun. Brian Walker from Herman Miller, who makes the Aeron chairs, is on my board. And what happened was when we started down the innovation path, we popped out R&D out of the businesses. So we had R&D in the engine group, we had R&D in the products group. The R&D in the engine group was generally to meet emissions regulations. And so if I ask any of you, would you like to have a cleaner engine, you'd say, yeah, we would. And then I ask you how much more you're willing to pay for it. And the answer is nothing, right? So we had these people doing all this stuff, we popped it out. And we popped out R&D, and so instead of putting an engineer in charge of R&D, when we started down our journey, I put a salesperson in charge. Because it was all about internal selling. It was all about excitement and gaining momentum behind some of this stuff. So this guy, who's now retired, a dear friend of mine, this guy would go out and he'd talk to anybody. I mean, literally, he would talk to anybody. And he started talking to my wife one day at a cocktail party. And he knows my wife. We mow our own lawn, and my wife loves mowing the lawn. And so she mows the lawn. I get to trim. She mows. I have to trim. She rides. I don't get it. So he looks at her and says, what are the issues you have? She goes, when it's 85 degrees outside and I'm cutting the grass, it's really kind of disgusting when I'm sitting on that plastic seat. Can't you do something about that? Well, gee, we know a guy who makes mesh chairs, Aeron chairs. How about if we go and see if we can't make a mesh seat out of the same material they use on Aeron chairs and put it on a lawn tractor? We did. It's out there on a Simplicity today. It's to the point where it's almost too good because in the middle of October when it starts getting cold, you got to put something down in that seat or your tushy is going to get a little cold. But it's things like that. It's not rocket science. It's things like that that make a difference. A lot of people ask me about battery. Lithium-ion batteries are a big deal. We have a whole lineup of lithium-ion product down in Australia. This is that cool little company I talked about, Victa. We launched a whole lineup of lithium-ion products. I don't know that we're going to bring it here to the U.S. for consumers. We may look at doing it for commercial users. Noise is a big deal. Lithium-ion is a big deal. You still have a lot of issues where these things need to be charged. But I would think a creative company that has like generators to charge batteries might actually figure something out if that company were smart. Here's our desired end state, and I'll finish here in a second. We've got 5 platforms that we work off of. Engines, lawn care, power generation, cleaning, and then we got into this interesting company called Allman for light towers, which is job site and construction. And when you look at the bottom, it says, it's hard to read, core capability, core power capabilities. It talks about things like batteries, diesel engines, and everything else. So people ask me all the time, are you guys going to go buy a diesel engine company? Are you going to go buy a battery company? Probably not. But what I tell them all these things have in common is the fact that it takes power and converts power into something you can use for work to make your life better. And that's what we do. We always thought of ourselves as being this manufacturer who gets the cost down, gets the cost down, and gets the cost down. Instead, we're thinking of ourselves as an innovator that takes power, keeps costs low, but it converts power to make people's lives better. Big deal throughout this process was celebrating. It was celebrating the achievements, it was celebrating the failures, and I kept innovation in front of people all the time. Last week, Thursday, we had our quarterly meeting. Every quarter, we bring our people together, and we videotape it, show it live, videotape, and in person. And we showed an 8.5-minute video. I'm not going to show it to you today. 8.5-minute video on all the innovation we've introduced this year. Last year, we did the same thing. We set up in our cafeteria a trade show type of environment where there's booths displaying product. I had more people come up to me and say, I've never been so proud to work for this company until today. I had people come up to me and say, I worked on that, I worked on that, and you could just see the pride these people exhibited. It's been fun. It's been a lot of fun. We're not done. We talk innovation, obviously, in the back office and everything else, but really user-driven problem solving is where the key is. So as I wrap up here, What I want to do is, remember the woman who had the problem starting, she was all excited about starting it? Could you play the other video? I'm curious as to what you think her reaction would be if she got up behind one of these things.
That's really neat. I like that. I like that a lot.
Pops right out, and you can plug this.
Right in here, and this charger will actually tell you if it's charging. Nothing could be simpler.
1 hour for 75 starts. So that could last you, a whole season.
Slap it on the charger for 10 minutes and you'll get 20 starts. So
Oh.
it charges very, very quickly.
Nice, nice.
So we're just going to push this button and magic's going to happen.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow. Wow. Many a time, as I'm walking into my garage, I go, I wonder if it's going to start. I wonder if we're going to be able to cut the grass. And if I'm in a rush, what's going to happen? So with this, it starts just like my car.
The ultimate. Rolls Royce.
That was about as easy as it gets.
Very simple, very easy.
Oh my gosh! That is easy.
Pretty nice.
See, they're thinking of everything now, ain't they?
I love the guy at the end. They think about everything, ain't they? So that's our story, and we're sticking to it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Todd. I think this is amazing, everything that you're working on. I love that start button. I won't tell you about the time I actually had to shovel snow by hand because I couldn't figure out how to start the stupid snowblower. But
I
anyway,
hate that when that happens.
and it was stupid, not me, right? Yeah. So.
No, I hate that when that happens.
But I think it's great how you're infusing innovation in your company and in Milwaukee. And I think today we learned it's not about the piston count, it's about problem solving. And it's great what you're doing. So I'd now like to introduce 3 GMC members who I'm sure have some really great questions prepared for you, Todd. First is Neil Hoffman. Neil is president of the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. He is retiring this spring after serving as president since 2007. And personally, I want to thank you, Neil. You've been a great friend and partner on a lot of projects, and you're going to be greatly missed. He's received many honors and awards, including commendations from the City and County of Los Angeles, the California Art Education Association Award in recognition of one of my Midwest 20 Milwaukee innovators. He's extremely active in our Milwaukee community. He serves as co-chair of the Creative Coalition Planning Task Force, and he's a member of the MPS Arts Education Board Advisory Committee. Next is Gail Leone. Gail is the director of Badger Meter with Todd Teske. She's also director of Sargento Foods and Doman, and an adjunct professor of intellectual property law at Marquette University. She formerly served as executive vice president, general counsel, secretary, and chief compliance officer of Harley-Davidson and president of the Harley-Davidson Foundation. She's also a member of the Fellows of the American Bar Foundation, the Advisory Council of the Marquette University Law School and Business School, and many more. She's received many awards and recognitions, including the Distinguished Alumnus Award from the University of Rochester, BizTimes Women's Business Executive of the Year Award, and Tempo Milwaukee's Mentor Award. And next we have Jonas Priesing. Jonas is the CEO of Manpower Group and co-chairs the Mike Council along with Todd and Mike Lovell. Jonas actively engages in the World Economic Forum annually and regional meetings and speaks at conferences and summits around the world on the labor market and the world of work trends. He is a former chairman of the Junior Achievement of USA Board of Directors, and he currently serves on the board of the USA and Wisconsin's boards of JA. He speaks 5 languages, English, French, German, Swedish, and Italian, and he also can sing some really great Swedish songs. during crayfish parties. So welcome Neil, Gail, and Jonas. Drinking songs. Drinking songs. I'll be clear.
I think I'm supposed to moderate this somehow, so I have a seat.
Okay. You say so.
So Todd, that was a great presentation. And by the way, Jonas is working on a sixth language. He's working on Cudahy. So he's almost got that one mastered. It'll be really terrific. So why don't we start, Gail, do you want to start with, yeah, Gail, I think you're willing to start?
I've been teaching a class at Marquette in the law school the last couple of years on strategically managing intellectual property. And we spend a lot of time talking about how you create a culture of innovation. Yes, these are lawyers talking about how you create a culture of innovation. And one of the, I think, sort of the tricky parts, particularly for a large company, and I'd be curious if you could speak a little bit more directly. You talked about having a salesperson as head of your R&D group. And I'd be curious, though, as to what other things you've done to really sort of encourage your engineering and R&D folks to be more entrepreneurial, and yet balancing that against the normal issues that any large company would have, and how you manage your intellectual property assets, which is something that's important. And, you know, sort of what people would normally think about is sort of too many restrictions in a large company that might inhibit the sort of freedom to create.
Sure, thanks. That's a great question. So we got a lot of engineers at our company. And what we've always done is we've tried to have the manufacturing engineers and the cost-focused engineers, they're kind of in the plants. And then what we have are design engineers to a certain extent, although we have very few designers in our company, but we have folks that do develop these products in R&D and also within our engine group primarily. And so what was really interesting about the R&D group to me was we had we have brilliant people in that group. And we have a couple of electrical engineers that had these great ideas right out of the chute. And I went, where'd you come up with this? And they said, oh, we've been working on this stuff over the last 10 years. I said, well, I haven't seen it. Why isn't anybody showing me? Well, it just didn't seem to be important. And so all of a sudden, I started spending a lot of time with that R&D group. And I started spending a lot of time with those engineers that I knew were going to get us kind of that next level in terms of innovation. And so engagement, I would tell you, is one thing. The second thing is what we celebrate, what we reward. And what we started doing was these celebrations I talked about were a big deal. I started spending a lot of time with our product development teams, understanding the 3-year roadmap and really pushing those teams. And the presidents of our groups did the same thing. So all of a sudden, you started to change the mindset. And one thing I was really concerned about was we're going to lose that cost focus. Because, look, this category isn't completely out of commoditization at all. I mean, we're not, Apple, and we're not Google, and we're not, all these other companies. On the other hand, I felt pretty comfortable to be able to take the organization and take the culture, if you will, what we celebrate, to a whole to the other side. And I would work my way back if I had to. I haven't had to do that yet. And so it really comes back to senior team engagement, what we reward, what we celebrate, and we celebrate failures too. We had one product that was just a failure. Didn't sell hardly at all at retail. We celebrate it because we learned a ton off of that.
And Neil, I know at MyEd, innovation, MyEd is all about innovation and teaching these students creative thinking and then getting them out into the companies. You've had some work with Briggs in the past. Do you have any questions for Todd?
Oh, I have one. I have it written down, actually. 4 years ago, the GMC and the Cultural Alliance, which is now the Creative Alliance, got together to create a study for creative industries. And out of that came Mike. I'm going to focus on that just for a moment. Innovation in Milwaukee. I'm curious, since you are the center of that activity, what you learned that translated differently than what you knew before relative to design thinking and the impact on you and on Briggs Now, that's my softball question I told you I'd give you. Because I know,
You got a hard
I
one
know
now,
he
Tom?
has the answer to that question. I do have a little bit of a follow-up to that one.
Sure. So, Mike was is an interesting entity. I mean, Julia approached me 4 years ago, September, I think it was, and said, hey, we're trying to do this Innovation in Milwaukee project. Would you like to be part of it? We'd like to co-chair. And I said, what is it? And she kind of looked at me and said, we're not quite sure yet. But yet, it was intriguing enough to understand that if we got something going on Innovation in Milwaukee, it became kind of the Silicon Valley for, at least manufacturing and hard goods, if you will. It could be kind of cool for the region. So I agreed, we got involved. It's been interesting to see how it's evolved. And I'll tell you, the thing that I have the most fun with Mike is all these people I get to meet that I otherwise wouldn't get to meet. And it's folks like, I think we had Sean Combs, SVP of Marketing, that came into a meeting. I got a chance, he's a power equipment guy, right? And so we started talking power equipment. So for those of you who don't know who Sean Combs is, P. Diddy? Okay, thanks.
That's because I hang around with law students.
Teenage daughters, I know.
So and then you realize just how much talent there is in the city that I was never exposed to before. One of the things that got to be really interesting was we had a council meeting, and Neil was sitting on the other side of the table from me, and we were talking about what's going on. And finally, I looked at Neil, and I said, Neil, why haven't you and I ever gotten to meet each other before? And he goes, I don't know. Let's get together for lunch. So we did, and I had the opportunity then to tour MIAD. And it was shortly thereafter that we hired our first 2 designers from MIAD. And it was funny at our company because if it wasn't Brooks Stevens, and I have the utmost respect for that firm, if it wasn't Brooks Stevens, then it must not be good enough. And so we'd have Brooks Stevens, designing cowlings and everything else for our covers for our engines. And then we went to BMW Design Works and spent an arm and a leg and said, why don't you guys go and show us what's the future of lawn and garden equipment? Well, what we got back was something completely impractical. It was unmanufacturable. And then we got together with Neil. We hired 2 of the students into R&D. And the reason we did it into R&D is because internal selling, this guy, the sales guy I put in charge of R&D, internal selling is as important as anything. And if it doesn't look different, people aren't going to think it's different. And so now we hire these 2 people. I think we're looking to hire several more because the workload internally is.
He's a slow learner.
I am, actually. Ask my wife, she'll tell you that. She's a special ed teacher, she knows. So it's one of those things where that was just critical in terms of innovation in Milwaukee.
My follow-up really, and I think some of you know that we have a collaboration with Marquette School of Engineering and us. We're integrating design thinking and engineering because we see that's what's out there in the field and what's necessary. I'm wondering what impact the designers have had on your engineers. Have they turned to fights? How do they get along with all that?
Actually, it's working very well, okay? And there's 2 reasons. One is the people that we hired are really good at working with other people, and you know that because you know both of them. They're both women, and that helps too because when it comes to getting mad at somebody, it's hard to get mad at somebody who knows what they're talking about, who's really easy to get along with. And these engineers that we have, they're used to fighting themselves. They want to go and hang with the design engineers or the designers because it's pretty cool. And so it really comes down to the people. These 2 women are fabulous. And now what happens is I see the collaboration happening. They're in separate buildings from our engineers, our other engineers that do the day-to-day stuff. And now you start to see they're hanging out together and the drawings and they get excited. I mean, it's really a lot of fun. It's completely changed the conversation internally.
Great. And Jonas, I know.
It's a plug for diversity.
It is. No, it really is.
Manpower was really founded on innovation in an industry that usually you don't think about innovation in staffing. But, you go all the way back to Elmer Winter and the White Glove Ladies and everything else, all the way up to some of the modern things you've been doing. So there's got to be some some
Well,
similarities.
the whole idea was innovative to the whole setup of the labor markets.
Right, so haben Sie eine Frage für Todd?
Für den Herrn Teske. Natürlich habe ich
But I think you
das.
better do it in English.
Yeah, I think you better too.
Well, Todd, as you know, well before joining Manpower Group, for the first decade of my professional career, I was working, within the industry that was, using Briggs and Stratton. I knew more about Briggs and Stratton then than I know today, which is not true since you and I have been working on Mike, because I was working in the parent company of Pull and Weed Eater and Husqvarna, and I saw from a manufacturing perspective, the whole transition between, from a innovative product that was, aluminum, engine blocks to, where that was commoditized, and, through a lot of the products. And, one of the businesses that I was in was around vacuum cleaners. And it was in exactly the same position as you discussed. The hope for vacuum cleaners was only to meet the next lowest price point, and to be able to get into exactly the same 80% distribution issue. And that was all true for the whole industry, and it was an accepted wisdom that this is the only way to be successful, until Dyson came onto the scene and tripled the price, the top price point, and blew out volumes from the mass manufacturers at with triple the price point and much higher volumes. So it just goes to show that when innovation really hits, you can surprise yourself, I think, to a great degree, as well as industry insiders that would just changing the game. But what I'm curious about, which is always difficult when you're working within a known set and you have your own frame of reference, is to manage an organization that at the same time that it's relentlessly and has to be an environment that focused on driving the business better, also combining that with driving it differently. And you've talked a lot about your personal involvement in R&D. So my curiosity is, so is this something, would you say that Briggs & Stratton is a much more innovative company as a whole? Or is it just that you have a bunch of really innovative people in R&D that happen to know also how you manufacture it, so that you don't come with great ideas that can't be delivered at a cost-effective way? So how do you think about that? How do you drive innovation within the organization? How broad-based is it from a culture perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jonas. It started off as being very narrow, right? And so it was all based on the product. Now we're taking it much broader, and it's all about user-driven problem solving, not just for the users of equipment, but also internally. So when you think about internal customers and everything else, how can we be more innovative in how we do things? And so we in terms of taking cost out, leaning things out, that sort of thing. So internally, there's a big focus. We're going through what we're calling Project Granite right now. And what it is, the other way to say it is, it's an SAP upgrade. And I think there's only one company that's ever made any money off of using SAP, and that's SAP. Because as I was talking with somebody from Kraft the other day, she was telling me everybody has their own SAP horror stories. Hopefully there's nobody in the room from SAP. But it's one of those things where it's just a very rigid system. Well, how can we now use the system for our betterment internally? At the same time, then, we look at it and go beyond the product on the external side. And what I keep telling our team is, I don't want to just sell stuff. I don't want to be transactional. I want to be, and we call it now, everybody calls it customer life cycle and customer lifetime value. We talk about user lifetime value. And so how do we ultimately work our way through where the users, we can be much more important to the user through information, allowing them to get information off of the equipment, get information from us. How do we keep that constant discussion going with them? And by the way, on a commercial user, because we have a commercial cutting equipment company, what can we do to give information to the users and the owners to make their businesses more efficient? So it has to do with, and the biggest thing that's going on right now for us is electronic fuel injection. And the reason electronic fuel injection is a big deal, it's not so much the fuel injection, although that's important. It's the fact that there's a computer on that engine now. And what else can you do with that computer? And so you can get sensors. Julie and I have had numerous discussions about sensor technology here in the city. Or in the region. Should the region be the sensor capital of the world, if you will? Because if you look at what GE is doing, you look at what a lot of other companies are doing with sensor technology, we're doing the same things. See, we're we don't have a lot of the product out, but it's a lot what we're playing with in R&D. We're hanging sensors off this motherboard, and now how do you get information and then communicate it? One of the products I didn't talk about was the Info Hub off your phone. It connects to a standby generator and ultimately gives you information off your standby generator because we have a computer. It's all electronic. We have a computer on that thing that will then transmit information to your phone and give you basic information. How can we do even more of that? So it really permeates throughout the organization, whether it be just the product, whether it's everything around the product, or whether it's whatever we do internally. We're mature enough to go down that path.
What I always say is we like to drive creativity in every area of the company except accounting. CEOs go to jail for creative accounting. So let me open this up to questions. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Todd, there have been a couple encouraging stories about Briggs & Stratton bringing production back to Wisconsin. Can you share with us your reasoning process on that and maybe give us a sense of how that's going to play out in the future?
Sure. So the question for those of you who didn't hear perhaps is we've been getting some favorable media for bringing jobs back to Wisconsin. In fact, I have gotten more phone calls than I could imagine saying, I can't imagine you guys are bringing work back. How can that be? You know, you had such terrible problems in the past, and the past is the past. So the way we look at it, our market's been down. And so when you look at peak to trough, we're still at the trough, and it has to do with housing. And so what we've been doing is rationalizing a lot of facilities. We started bringing work back. We had floor space in Milwaukee here in the Wauwatosa plant. And as we started thinking about this innovation, we thought, you know, it's one of those things where we've got all the engineers for the product side here in Milwaukee, and the product is produced in Georgia or it's produced, somewhere else. Why don't we bring some of that back? So now we're making pressure washers, soon to be making lawn tractors. We make standby generators in the Wauwatosa facility. A couple things happened in terms to make that possible. One is the union environment today in which we operate is dramatically different. Our relationship with the union is a lot better than it was back in the 80s and the mid-90s. And a lot of that has to do with, I think, as our former VP of Corporate Communications would say, there's a lot of waxy buildup. And there was a lot of waxy buildup. And it just took some new people. I didn't live through the 1983 strike or 82 strike. I didn't live through the labor strife that we had in 94, 95. And so I, throughout our labor negotiations, because it was the labor contract that helped set this up, that would get a wage base that would work. Throughout that process, I would get up at our meetings in front of our whole team. We'd have 400 people in the auditorium. And I know there's people that have been with the company for 30 years that want to go, let's just screw the union, right? And I'd get up and I'd say, you guys got to understand something. This union, they're part of our team. Now, we happen to negotiate differently with them than maybe others, but these people are still part of our team, and I don't want you to ever forget that. And that started to kind of change the thinking a little bit amongst the group. And then, ultimately, we were able to reach an accord with the union for new jobs and everything else. And then, I'm not going to kid you, at the same time, the state was doing different things. And the environment to create jobs in the state of Wisconsin is dramatically different today than it was 10 years ago. And I chaired the WMC for a couple of years. It was about 2 or 3 years ago that I chaired it. And we were working a lot with the governor's office as an organization, WMC, state chamber, and trying to define what it is that the state needs to do. And he's done a lot of it. And so this morning, I had to rush here. I was down in Pleasant Prairie, one of our customer/suppliers. It's a funny industry that we're in. Just opened up a plant in Pleasant Prairie. It's the F&A group. We had their grand opening this morning. They asked me to come and participate in the festivities. The lieutenant governor was there. The WDC was there. They just created 180 jobs that otherwise might have been down in Georgia, might have been in Illinois. And so when you look at the environment that's out there today, it's dramatically different. We hope to grow here. We like the fact that our engineers are close to the assembly line. And so we hope to grow and continue to prosper here in the state because it's just a good place to do business now.
Other questions? Yes?
I've heard some cool ideas about gain sharing with employees that have come up with fantastic ideas, like some of the ones you talked about.
Yeah, so we're starting to change our comp structure a little bit, not a lot. We've been EVA-based, economic value-added based, for a long time. And the thing that did for us way back in '92 when we put it in was it made us pay attention to the balance sheet and the income statement. Yeah, I didn't want to lose that. So we still have, but we modified it. It got very complicated, very convoluted along the way. And so what we did is we just simplified it last year, where we take only parts of the income statement that people can control. Not everybody controls taxes, right? So you ultimately, you take that, and then you take those pieces of the balance sheet that they can control. That's the first step in simplifying the comp structure. Now what we're doing is we're starting to track, and we'll start to put in like 20% of certain people's bonuses can be based on metrics, not BVA, but metrics. And some of the metrics are innovation-based. So as we look at it, we've got some, we do what a lot of companies do. It's a vitality index, right? So how much of your products are new? And we always have the issue of what's new, what's not new. So what's new, and we've got some goals on that. And then the other thing in the engine business especially, I talked about commoditization. It's all about using innovation. We're not going to gain any more market share. We have 60 to 80% market share. We're not going to go and gain any more market share. But what we can do is we can enhance margins by giving users the value, things they value. And so we're measuring that now too in terms of margins on new products to make sure that they're expanding. Those sorts of things then get thrown into the innovation system, or the compensation system to reward innovation. At the same time, we do some things with restricted stock grants and other things for people who do a great job that prior year with regards to new and different stuff. If you had a great idea, your chances of getting some restricted stock, for example, just went up exponentially. And so it's really, you get what you reward, right? And so we had to make some changes to the comp system, but I didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but yet accommodate the innovation.
Other questions?
How long until you have a lawnmower that you don't need a person behind?
How long until we have a lawnmower that you don't? It's a robotic lawnmower. They're actually taking off in Europe right now. The reason in Europe they're taking off is you don't have commercial cutters in Europe because the lawns are too small. Economically, you can't pay somebody the kind of European wages that are prevailing today. So what they do is they have these robotic mowers. I gotta be careful because our customers make these. They have batteries on them, okay? But I'll toe the line, but I'll give you a little insight on that. So a dog fence, where you put an invisible dog fence up, you put the wire around. Well, that's what they do in Europe. They put the wire around. The wire gets cut. The unit doesn't work so well. So we had one of these things out in the back. Behind my office is a parking lot, and then we have 40 acres out back. So we put a robotic mower in place. And these things mow at night. And so it'll be every night that they mow. But they mow very randomly. So I go out there. I think R&D has a CEO alert that whenever I go out and start looking at something new that's out in the field, like 3 guys descend on me. It's like Secret Service or something. So we're running this thing, and I decide I'm going to go out and take a look at this thing. So I go out, and all of a sudden the 3 guys are there. I said, hey, what happens if I pick it up? So I walked right up to it. This mower was running, picked it up, shut off. I said, okay, so we started it up again. I said, what happens if I throw a piece of paper underneath the mower? Now, normally in a normal gas lawnmower, what would happen is you get lift from the blade, and then the blades would just shred that piece of paper. I do it all the time in my yard with stuff in my yard, right? Well, I put the piece of paper underneath, and it rode over it. And there was a little cut here, and a little cut there, and a little cut there, but it was still one piece of paper. I looked at it, I said, this thing doesn't cut very well. So I looked at the R&D guys, and I said, you know what? Robotics are coming to the U.S., but they're probably coming in a different way. I said, we need to have robotics. And so we're in the process of working on something that's substantially different than what you would see today in Europe. By the way, these European units go for anywhere from $2,000 to $3,500. Now think about spending that on a lawn that would be about the size of a lawn in Wauwatosa. Just not very big. So they're out there. You haven't seen them here in the U.S. My guess is some enterprising engine/products company might be able to come up with something a little bit more interesting in the not-so-distant future.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I'm going to go the opposite way.
She's got a microphone there.
So I'm going to go to the opposite way with my question. Instead of robotics, it seems like we had a generation of people who grew up, their first experience with small engines was to repair their own. And with the innovation that you're talking about, it seems like that's going to get more and more difficult. Have you all talked about or considered whether or not that's still something that consumers really desire, the ability to fix their own when it breaks down, or we move into a situation where every time something goes wrong with the chip, I have to take it into some Briggs & Stratton certified repair specialist to get it going? Or maybe they don't break down in 100 years and we never have to worry about it.
That's the answer, right?
So the key is, here's how we think about it. And we try to make these things so they don't break. So our quality, our warranty numbers have been a lot better. But there still is some DIY things that you need to do to maintain. Look, these are mechanical pieces of equipment. And so they need to have, it's like your car, it needs to have periodic service. Now, if we can take the service intervals down, like we just did this year with what we call the just check and add oil engine, you don't change the oil ever on that thing. You check it with the dipstick, and if you need a little more, you pour a little more in. It's not designed to change the oil. So that's the way you maintain it. Simplify the way you maintain it. Air filters, simplify the way they go in, how you put them in. And then this other cool thing called YouTube is really awesome, okay? And a couple of years ago, the team wanted to show just how easy it is to do a tune-up on your lawnmower. So, and they picked somebody they knew that, they were gonna have a hard time with it, and just to show how easy it was. So on a Saturday morning in the middle of March, the camera crew showed up at my house. It was hilarious. We pulled the mower out, and I had information. At the same time, the younger generation is too busy playing Xbox, like my son, he's 17. He's a throwback. He cuts lawns in the summer, but all of his buddies are all playing Xbox and everything, and they don't cut lawns. And so now what happens to our brand when somebody's 25 to 31 looking for that new house? Are they going to just go buy on price, or are they going to buy based on our brand? And that's why this innovation, this cool stuff, and having more, we're spending more money on digital marketing. In fact, we've taken away from our TV, print, and radio advertising and gone much more digital marketing, because that's where the digital natives are going to be hanging out to understand, what's important on a lawnmower along the way. So it's changing the way we do business and everything else, but specific to your question, it's how do we make it easy?
You probably would have gotten more hits if Kim was the star of that video.
Probably would have gotten more hits if my wife would have been the star of the video. Yeah, that's probably
And she
right.
would have made sure the garage was clean.
And she would have made sure the garage was clean.
That's true. So, well, I want to thank our panel today. Let's give them a big round of applause. And I want to remind you that we have a special insiders breakfast coming this Thursday morning at 7:30 here at the University Club. We're partnering with the Greater Milwaukee Foundation to present a panel discussion focusing on the state's education budget, a very timely topic, featuring Dr. Darian Driver of MPS and 2 other area superintendents. Mark Sablejack will moderate the conversation. Rob Henkin will set the stage before the discussion. We hope to see you there. Everybody have a great day and drive carefully. Thank you.
Thank you. Boy, he knows his business.
Yeah.